Thomas noticed that the elderly, alien archivist flinched when he looked her in the eyes, as if she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, and he recognized that flinch because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. The records archive on the space station was a vast chamber of knowledge, filled with ancient scripts and data cubes from across the galaxy. Thomas Red had been tasked by one of his human acquaintances who managed a small research team here to gather information about an extinct civilization for their ongoing project. He approached the desk where Thessaly Vor'Eventide sat behind piles of holographic files. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat softly, as she looked up from her work with surprise and perhaps even some alarm. She blinked twice before speaking in a voice that was both soft and resonant, like an old instrument finely tuned over the years, but now rarely played. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Thomas replied. He pulled out a small data pad, running his fingers gently over its surface as he brought up the request form for their research team's project. "I need to look through your collection about the collisions." Thessaly tilted her head slightly, regarding him with an unreadable expression before nodding slowly and reaching towards one of many small holo displays that hovered beside her desk. She tapped several keys on it, and a screen flickered into life displaying various databases they could access. "Very well," she said after another moment's hesitation. "But first, may I ask your name?" "It's Thomas Reid." He offered his hand in greeting, which Thessaly took with an almost delicate touch before releasing it quickly, as if unsure what to do next. "I'm from Earth, specifically Cambridge." Thessaly nodded again, but did not return the handshake. Instead, she continued setting up access codes on her holo displays. "Of course," she murmured thoughtfully, and then added with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "Welcome to our library." They worked in silence for some time while Thomas sifted through the collision records Thessaly had provided. He noticed how she avoided looking directly at him, preferring instead to stare down at her desk or into space whenever he spoke, as if finding it difficult even now after so many years of isolation and neglect. At one point, when he paused for a moment in contemplation over some newly found text fragments on their culture's religious beliefs, Thomas glanced up to find Thessaly staring out the large window behind him. Her gaze was distant, her posture slumped forward slightly, as if trying not to draw attention to herself, even here amongst thousands of documents and records. Suddenly struck by a thought about literature back home that had always fascinated him, how great works spoke in different languages, yet resonated with universal Themesh decided to break the silence. "Tell me," he said, his voice soft but steady, "what are your thoughts on Earth poetry?" Thessaly turned sharply at this unexpected question, and their eyes met briefly before she looked away again almost immediately. Her expression shifted from surprise to something akin to bemusement before settling into what appeared more like nostalgia or a distant recollection. "What do you know of our Eventide poets?" she asked in return, her tone taking on an intriguing quality, as if the mere mention of literature had stirred some long, dormant passion within her. "Or perhaps I should say do not know." Thomas felt his curiosity piqued and leaned forward slightly across the desk, genuinely interested now despite himself. "From what little I've read," he replied thoughtfully, setting aside the datapad to focus entirely on their conversation. "Your poetry seems concerned with themes of time's passing and beauty's fleeting nature." Thessaly nodded slowly before starting into a brief discussion about how poets among her people once celebrated life in all its forms, bloom of youth, alongside the wisdom of aging, lamented when society turned against them as it had aged, no longer valuing those who'd given so much. Her words were filled with such deep feeling that Thomas could hear sorrow beneath layers of resignation. By the time they concluded their discussion on poetry and moved back to focusing on his research task for an hour or more after this unexpected detour into shared literary appreciation, both humans and Eventide had grown less guarded around each other. Yet even now, as Thomas prepared to leave later that afternoon, Thessaly still hadn't told him her name directly. As he stood up from the desk ready to depart with his newfound knowledge of collision history, there was a brief moment when their eyes met once more before Thomas turned and began walking away towards the exit. Just as he reached the door, though, something made him stop short suddenly. He spun around back into view of Thessaly, who had gone silent again at his reappearance. She seemed startled by this unexpected return, but didn't look displeased, exactly bewildered, even if only slightly curious now too, perhaps. "Why did you never tell me your name?" Thomas asked softly, almost shyly. Thessaly blinked in surprise, and then smiled faintly, as she replied, "I am Thessaly Vor'Eventide. And what brings a man such as yourself back merely to inquire about that?" Thomas laughed lightly at her indirectness, but answered sincerely nonetheless, "Because I wanted to know the person who spoke so passionately with me today, not just another face in this vast library." For one fleeting instant, Thomas saw something change behind Thessaly's eyes, an unexpected warmth flickering there before it faded as quickly. But he felt confident enough then that whatever spark had flared briefly meant she hadn't entirely closed herself off after all these years. So with no further words, but a small nod acknowledging each other anew, both humans and Eventide went their separate ways back to the routine tasks awaiting them amidst this vast space station. Thomas back to his temporary office across from here, while Thessaly returned fully now to her records, as if nothing had transpired at all today, except perhaps an unexpected connection between two solitary souls. But neither could shake entirely away that feeling of being seen again. Thomas Red found himself wandering back to Thessaly's office at least twice a week, drawn by an inexplicable sense of curiosity and loneliness that seemed to deepen each day he spent on the alien station. It was a place where time stretched endlessly in all directions, but for Thomas, it felt as though his days were compressed into an eternal now. The rhythmless world outside offered no solace. Instead, it mirrored the emptiness within. On one particularly gray afternoon, Thomas stepped through the threshold of Thessaly's office once again. She looked up from her work at his approach with a slight frown before recognition softened her features. "Thomas Red," she greeted him warmly but cautiously, as if testing whether he was truly welcome back yet another day. "Good to see you, Thessaly Vor'Eventide," Thomas replied politely, and took the seat across her desk without being asked. He felt an odd sense of comfort here, among alien artifacts and ancient records that seemed so foreign yet strangely familiar after his year's study in humanities on Earth. He pulled out a thick data pad filled with notes from his research project mapping human culture onto Eventide society, and then set it aside almost immediately in favor of engaging her in conversation once more. "Have you read any poetry recently, Thessaly?" he asked tentatively, but with genuine interest glowing beneath the surface. "I was thinking about one of Keats' sonnets this morning while translating an old document." Thessaly's eyes lit up as she leaned back slightly into her chair, a rare flash of excitement crossing her face. She crossed her legs gracefully under her desk and folded her hands thoughtfully in front of her. "Indeed," she responded slowly, savoring the question like a favorite memory long forgotten but just rediscovered. "We have a poet on my homeworld named Kales who wrote sonnets about time's endless passage while still celebrating each moment as though it were eternal. Thomas nodded eagerly and reached for his pad to jot down her name quickly. Kaylee's was unfamiliar, yet intriguing. "Tell me more," he pressed gently. "What themes did they explore?" Thessaly sighed softly before launching into a detailed explanation of how Kaylee's poetry reflected on the cycle of life from birth through decay and rebirth, once again celebrating every stage, even as it lamented the loss inherent in change. She spoke with such passion and depth that Thomas found himself leaning closer, his eyes wide behind wire-rimmed glasses. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon her words. Her voice carried not just age, but wisdom born from seeing lifetimes pass by like seasons changing on a single leaf outside her window. "Poets in my time often celebrated beauty," Thessaly continued, "but over generations, as our society aged with us, art began to focus less on the transient glory of youth and more towards eternal truths hidden within each moment's decay." Thomas listened intently while scribbled copious notes beside her desk, trying desperately not to let his awe distract him from capturing every detail. But then he paused mid-sentence when she drifted off into contemplation for a moment or two, eyes lost somewhere far beyond this office and its records of long-forgotten empires. "When society rejects those who've served it well," Thessaly finally murmured, her voice almost too soft to hear over the hum of alien technology around them. "It's like losing a child, an extension of yourself growing old alongside you." Thomas felt his chest tighten uncomfortably at this candid admission. Painful echoes resonated within him from his own recent loss. "But isn't poetry supposed to be about celebrating life?" he asked quietly, more as rhetorical question than something expecting answer. Thessaly looked up sharply, then blinked slowly, realization dawning in her lavender eyes. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach deep enough through the sorrow still lingering there. "Perhaps," she conceded with a soft nod, and reached out to rest one slender hand atop his notes where he had paused writing. "But sometimes even celebration can turn bitter without appreciation." Their gazes locked for several heartbeats longer than either cared to admit before Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly and pushed away from the desk again, suddenly eager to return some sense of normalcy back between them. "Well," he began briskly, as if this had been planned all along, "if you don't mind me asking, what other types of literature do we have here in Eventharan culture?" Thessaly seemed surprised by his sudden change, but quickly recovered into calm professionalism. She gestured towards several shelves lined with ancient tomes and scrolls filled with tales ranging from epic adventures across star systems to philosophical dialogues about existence itself. "From epics detailing the rise of our race among stars," she said, eyes gleaming brightly behind them like a galaxy caught in her iris, "to essays exploring metaphysical questions beyond material realms." Thomas leaned forward eagerly now, his academic curiosity fully reawakened by these revelations. "And philosophers?" he pressed excitedly. Thessaly chuckled softly before nodding and gesturing to a smaller section of shelves marked philosophy. She guided him through the titles. There are names like Vor'Eventide and Dravkes, whose ideas Thomas found strikingly similar yet subtly different from his own earth-bound philosophies. Hours slipped by unnoticed as they delved deeper into these works, comparing Eastern human philosophy with Eventharan counterparts, discussing similarities in existential thought between Spinoza's pantheism and Dvorak's concept of unity within the cosmos. By mid-afternoon both were thoroughly immersed once again, despite having agreed to stick only briefly on this detour from his research task. Thomas felt a spark ignite anew behind every word exchanged, energizing him more than he had in years, with each new insight gleaned. Yet eventually, even they needed respite, and so Thomas gathered up the remnants of his notes hesitantly, but knew better than to linger any longer unless invited. "I have never," Thessaly murmured thoughtfully, as Thomas prepared once again for departure, her gaze focused on him now rather than lost somewhere else entirely. "Had such a stimulating conversation in all my years here." Thomas froze mid-step towards the door, heart stuttering at this unexpected praise, echoing back to him like rarest gold plucked from deepest riverbeds. "Thessaly," he began uncertainly, turning around, fully facing her now rather than halfway out the exit as before. Her eyes were wide, but not quite expecting his next words yet again either, when Thomas stepped forward and brushed fingertips gently along her wrist in a gesture both respectful and grateful. "You deserve to be seen," he told her sincerely, voice barely above whisper, though every syllable felt like thunder resonating inside him too loudly for comfort. For several long moments Thessaly stared at their joined hands before she pulled back slowly, with a soft sigh escaping lips that had grown lax from surprise. She smiled genuinely, thin, a real smile, rather than the half-hearted one he'd glimpsed earlier when his unexpected visitation broke her solitude momentarily once more, though there was still an undercurrent of hesitance. Thomas felt it lessening slightly this time. "Thank you," she murmured softly, and looked away shyly before meeting back his gaze again. "And now I must return to my work." Thomas nodded understandingly, even as he felt reluctant about leaving behind the brief but profound connection they'd forged today. He straightened up with a final respectful nod towards her and began making way out of office, only pausing briefly just before exit. "I will bring more human literature next time," Thomas promised softly, hand hovering near door, yet not quite ready to push through it just yet either. Thessaly blinked again in surprise at this offer, but nodded graciously enough. "I look forward to your insights." And with that, both retired back into their separate worlds, once more Thomas to his temporary office across the station, and Thessaly fully now returned among her records, as if nothing had transpired today, except perhaps an unexpected meeting of kindred spirits. But neither could quite shake entirely away whatever spark may have briefly flared between them under alien suns, nor forget how good it felt being seen again by someone who truly looked beyond surface appearances to see value within. By late afternoon, Thomas found himself in one of his rare moments of clarity, walking along the sterile corridors of the alien station, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and trepidation after another stimulating conversation with Thessaly. He had promised her that he would return soon to share more human literature, something she seemed genuinely excited about despite herself. As Thomas made his way back towards his temporary office across from the Eventide archive, he noticed a familiar figure ahead, young Administrator Sci-Fi Vor'Eventide, Thessaly's nephew, and now also head of administration on the station. Sci-Fi was known for being particularly dismissive and cruel to any alien who did not meet his skewed standards of perfection. Thomas paused at an intersection as Sci-Fi approached, giving him a brief nod before continuing down the hallway with determined strides that belied his youth. He had heard whispers around the station about how Sci-Fi treated Thessaly. Her age, experience, and wisdom were nothing more than burdens in Sci-Fi's eyes. He saw them solely through the lens of what they could no longer offer to him or others like him. Reaching his office, Thomas entered quietly, but was interrupted by a soft knock on the door mere moments later. He opened it to find Thessaly standing there, her white hair slightly disheveled from her long day in the archives. She looked up at him with an expression of mild surprise mingled with relief. "Thomas," she greeted softly, I was just passing by and thought perhaps you would still be here." "I am always glad to see a friendly face," Thomas replied sincerely, holding the door open for her to enter as he stepped back. Thessaly moved in silently, glancing around his modest office with an air of curiosity before settling into one of the chairs facing him. They spoke briefly about some minor adjustments she had made to the cataloging system based on their earlier discussions. Her insights were invaluable, and Thomas found himself eager to hear more, but there was a heaviness now in her demeanor, something he couldn't quite put his finger on yet felt compelled to ask about once they settled down. "You seemed different today," Thomas remarked cautiously as she paused mid-sentence. "Is everything all right?" Thessaly hesitated before shaking her head slightly. "It is nothing you need concern yourself with," she said gently, but there was a clear invitation in the tone for him to pursue it further if he wished. "Are you certain?" Thomas pressed kindly, leaning forward across his desk towards her. There was genuine worry coloring his voice now. Thessaly couldn't hide from herself how much this meant coming from someone like Thomas, a man who had every reason not to care, and yet still managed to see beyond the surface of others more than most. "It is nothing," she reiterated with a small sigh, looking away momentarily. "I should return soon to my duties." Thomas nodded understandingly, but didn't let her leave just yet. There was something nagging at him that he needed clarification on. "May I ask, then, if this had anything to do with the young administrator?" Thessaly's eyes flashed back towards his face immediately, widening in surprise before narrowing slightly as she registered what Thomas must have overheard or understood about Kylan's treatment of her. "He is not known for being kind," Thessaly admitted quietly, but without any particular edge of resentment. It was more a statement than an accusation. Perhaps the weight of centuries had taught her that such things were simply part of life, and one couldn't dwell on them forever. "Indeed he isn't," Thomas agreed softly yet firmly. "I'll make sure to speak with him if I think it necessary." Thessaly's lavender eyes softened as she met his gaze again. There was gratitude in their depths now, but also the beginnings of a smile playing at her lips, a rare sight, and one that did not go unnoticed by Thomas, who found himself responding warmly. "Thank you," Thessaly murmured sincerely, standing up finally to leave. "I appreciate your concern." As she made for the door once more, this time leaving it firmly behind without waiting to see if he would follow her out, Thomas watched silently before reaching a decision. He needed to find Kylan and set him straight about how he treated Thessaly. A few hours later, as dusk settled over the station, Thomas spotted Kylan in one of the larger common rooms engaged in what appeared to be an informal meeting with several other young Eventide administrators huddled around a data display table. The group was laughing loudly at something someone had just said when Thomas approached cautiously but purposefully. Kylan noticed him immediately, and his jovial demeanor quickly switched gears as he fixed Thomas with a glare that spoke volumes about how little patience or respect he held for the older human consultant. "Mr. Reed," Kylan greeted coldly upon recognizing who was approaching them, cutting short whatever joke had been shared among colleagues moments before. Thomas remained calm despite the tension brewing around him. Perhaps this was why he felt compelled to challenge Kylan now instead of letting things slide by without comment as usual. "Administrator Vor'Eventide," Thomas acknowledged equally coolly, but with a firmness that made it clear no small talk would suffice today. "I need to speak privately with you." Kylan's eyes narrowed further at the implied criticism before he turned back briefly towards his colleagues, who were now watching curiously, if apprehensively. "Very well," Kylan conceded stiffly, gesturing for Thomas and himself to follow him elsewhere where they could discuss whatever issue had brought them here without an audience present. As they walked down a deserted hallway leading deeper into the station's inner levels away from prying eyes, tension hung heavily between both men despite neither voicing their thoughts aloud just yet. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Kylan inquired pointedly once the three of them had reached another small meeting room at some distance removed from their initial location. Thomas took a deep breath before speaking clearly and directly. "It concerns your treatment of Thessaly." Kylan stopped walking short mid-step, turning sharply to face Thomas with visible shock on his features, but quickly masking it behind a veneer of controlled irritation. "That has nothing to do with you," he snapped back, instantly defensive. "Perhaps not," Thomas conceded slowly, choosing each word carefully, as if mindful of the delicacy required here despite how much he wanted to lash out verbally too against such blatant disrespect from someone so young and clearly arrogant enough to think himself above reproach. "But it does matter." Kylan scoffed loudly before folding his arms across his chest in a huff, staring at Thomas with an expression that plainly said, "Prove yourself otherwise." "Tell me," Kylan challenged testily instead, after several more tense moments passed between them without any immediate answers forthcoming from either side, yet clearly needing to resolve something today. Thomas squared his shoulders resolutely before he spoke again firmly. "You mock her age, belittle what she contributes, because of your own narrow-minded view on worth based solely upon appearance and physical prowess." Kylan's expression hardened further as the accusation hit home harder than Thomas likely intended despite it being accurate, yet there was an unmistakable undercurrent beneath that harsh exterior, or now to something darker simmering dangerously near boiling point. "You don't know what you're talking about," Kylan retorted fiercely. "The human must not know she is ancient and worthless to us." He sneered cruelly, drawing gasps, even from those present here, who had heard this kind of talk before but rarely so openly spoken aloud nonetheless. Thomas' eyes widened briefly in surprise at how bluntly Kylan was now being with his cruelty towards Thessaly. It stung deeply within him more than just as an observer, though knowing full well what such words could do to someone, even if they had long since learned to expect similar treatment over the centuries from others like this arrogant young man. "You have no idea," Thomas continued icily, voice low but controlled now despite how much he wanted to raise it against Kylan's disrespect. "She is one of the most brilliant and insightful women I've ever spoken with in decades. No male has looked at her with desire in centuries doesn't negate that." Kylan stared back stonily for a long moment more before scoffing again dismissively. "Your species lacks depth," he mocked coldly, turning to walk away even as his fellow administrators scattered nervously out of the room, leaving Thomas alone but undeterred. "Wasted on someone who can see her worth," Thomas called after Kylan without bothering to try and goad him back again. And with that final statement ringing in air long after Kylan had left, silence fell once more among those present still lingering around, unsure how to react amidst such a bold confrontation of authority as this. Thomas exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what he'd just done settling over him. There was no going back now from here. But at least for Thessaly maybe things could finally start changing in ways that mattered most. He turned then and walked out quietly, leaving those behind to digest whatever had transpired amongst themselves, while his mind raced ahead considering next steps towards ensuring this momentous shift actually took hold, moving forward under difficult circumstances. When Thomas returned later that evening, he found Thessaly back in her office amidst stacks of records but she seemed far more settled now than earlier. Her lavender eyes met him immediately, with an unspoken question lingering between them, as if somehow sensing what had transpired despite him not having spoken about it yet. "Thomas," she greeted quietly, after several long moments staring at each other uncertainly, "I was wondering how your conversation went." "It could have been worse," Thomas admitted honestly, but without any particular edge or regret. He moved forward and settled into one of the chairs opposite her desk, where Thessaly now sat waiting patiently. "What did you say exactly?" she inquired gently, after several more quiet moments passed between them, allowing initial awkwardness to fade away naturally, as it often does among those who truly care for each other deeply despite everything else standing against such connections sometimes. "I told him that he had no right treating you like this, and that your worth is far greater than what his standards dictate," Thomas replied directly, meeting her eyes steadily without flinching. "You are one of the most brilliant women I have spoken to in decades." Thessaly blinked several times slowly at such honest praise coming from him. There was a mix of surprise, disbelief, and something like warmth now blooming within her features that he hadn't seen before, which made his heart swell unexpectedly, even as it hurt seeing how much this meant despite all the effort she had put into guarding against caring again after so long. "Thank you," Thessaly murmured softly, almost breathlessly, but with genuine gratitude in every syllable. I do not deserve such compliments." "You very much do, Thessaly," Thomas countered gently yet firmly, meeting her eyes steadily, once more holding her gaze unwaveringly. He reached out slowly and placed his hand atop hers, still resting on the desk between them, as if to emphasize everything he had said without needing words anymore. They stared at each other silently for several long moments afterward, neither speaking further, but simply feeling connected in a way that transcended mere conversations or surface interactions alone. There was an understanding here now that spoke of deeper mutual respect and appreciation beyond what most others might ever understand between them. And though both knew fully well it could not change everything overnight, still this moment marked something significant nonetheless, amidst their shared struggles against societal expectations weighing heavily upon each other. That evening, as Thomas prepared to retire back to his quarters, Thessaly remained alone in her office, surrounded by countless records and the wisdom of ages, yet somehow she felt lighter than before now despite all that burdened them. Still, perhaps tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she could sleep knowing someone truly saw value within, even when society insisted otherwise. And as Thomas lay down finally, after another long day filled with unexpected revelations, he too found himself feeling an unusual sense of peace settle over him. Whatever happened next between Thessaly and Kylan, or anyone else, no longer mattered so much now, because tonight had been different in ways that would ripple outward, influencing both their lives far beyond what either might have expected initially, amidst such vast cosmic distances. Indeed, the station's evening shadows crept in as Thomas left Thessaly's office, his mind swirling with the day's events. He walked through the dimly lit corridors with a slight stoop, each step feeling heavier than usual. Back at his quarters, Thomas sat on his couch and stared into space for hours before finally deciding to write in his journal, a habit had picked up as an old way of processing thoughts after years of teaching literature. His fingers hesitated over the keys, but then moved with a familiar rhythm. Today was different. Today I stood by someone who felt unseen, unheard, and dismissed. Someone whose value is so often overlooked. I told her that she deserved better than what society dictated, that she had worth far beyond any standard set by others. Thomas sighed heavily as he read over his words again. He closed the journal with a soft click and leaned back into the couch cushions. Thessaly sat at her desk long after Thomas left, her thoughts racing like never before. She felt lighter, but also heavy. A weight lifted, yet another settled in its place because of today's events. The memory of Thomas standing up for her lingered vividly. It was as if she'd been given a rare gift that defied the expectations and norms set by centuries. Finally, after hours alone, Thessaly decided to seek out Thomas again. She knew there might not be much more they could say right now, but perhaps just being together would help ease some of her confusion. The air in the hallway was cool as Thessaly approached Thomas' quarters. Her heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and fear. Anticipation for what might come next, and fear because she had long forgotten how to trust or believe that someone could see past superficial appearances. "Thomas," Thessaly called softly through his door when it opened without her needing to knock. She stepped inside slowly, her lavender eyes searching him out in the dim light of the room. He looked up from where he was sitting on a chair across from an open window, watching the stars outside pass by as if time itself moved differently here at the station. The weight of his day still hung heavy around him, but seeing Thessaly now brought unexpected comfort despite all their struggles. "Thessaly," Thomas replied quietly, nodding to her in greeting without turning fully away from the view before him. "You didn't have anything else you needed?" She walked towards him and stood beside where he sat, her silver-violet skin reflecting a gentle hue under ambient lighting of his room. Her voice was soft when she spoke again. "No, I just wanted to make sure everything is all right," Thessaly said carefully, looking down at the floor for a moment before meeting Thomas's eyes steadily once more. "You stood up for me earlier." Thomas exhaled slowly and turned fully towards her now, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that caught her off guard. "Of course I did," he stated firmly, but gently still. "It was only right." A shiver ran through Thessaly. At the sincerity in his voice, it resonated deeply within her, stirring emotions long dormant inside because she had stopped allowing herself to feel them years ago, when everyone else seemed to have given up on her too. "But why?" she asked softly, almost whispering under her breath more than speaking out loud, though he heard clearly enough despite how quiet the words themselves were. "No one has defended me like that since I was young." Thomas looked away momentarily, his eyes clouded with memory and pain as he remembered the days when his own marriage had faltered and finally ended because of society's expectations. "Because you deserve it," Thomas replied, firmly, but also quietly now, understanding fully how deeply Thessaly felt this question cutting into her core self-worth. "And I know what that feels like too." He paused, choosing each word carefully before continuing on. "My wife left me years ago when she found someone younger who could still make her feel valued," Thomas admitted gently, without any bitterness, but rather a weariness born from acceptance and resignation over time of his place in life now after so much had changed for him personally. "I stopped believing I deserved affection or happiness." Thessaly's breath caught at hearing this, her mind reeling back to when she was once celebrated among her people before everything shifted overnight as beauty and youth became the only currencies valued by society. She stammered, looking down again, but then forcing herself to look up into his eyes now with determination shining through despite overwhelming emotions bubbling underneath. "I had forgotten too." Her voice broke slightly on those final words. Years of self-doubt, resignation, and loneliness threatened to overwhelm her just thinking about it all once more. Thomas reached out slowly, across the small space between them without hesitation or fear this time now, because he understood how much this meant despite everything else standing against such connections sometimes. He placed his hand atop hers, still resting on a nearby surface, as if to emphasize silently, with no need for words anymore, what he had said moments ago about seeing value within her far beyond any standard set by others. Their fingers intertwined gently under the light touch, sending shivers through both of them now in different ways, but connecting nonetheless despite all external pressures weighing heavily upon each other still. "Thank you," Thessaly murmured softly, again almost breathlessly this time, because it felt strange yet somehow comforting to know someone truly saw her as valuable even when society insisted otherwise. "For standing up for me today." Thomas squeezed her hand gently in return, the gesture simple yet profoundly meaningful, now undercurrents rippling through both their lives beyond what either might have expected initially, amidst such vast cosmic distances. "We should go back," Thomas suggested softly, after a moment of shared silence between them, looking out at stars outside still reflecting some deeper connection forming despite challenges they faced day to day or week over week here on station. "It's getting late." Thessaly nodded silently in agreement, her lavender eyes glistening slightly as she looked down again before meeting his gaze one last time, now knowing things had shifted between them, even if not drastically changed overnight, but nonetheless marked something significant for both of them amidst their shared struggles against societal expectations weighing heavily upon each other. The evening had grown dark outside their small alcove, the stars in the distant expanse casting a serene glow through the large windows of the alien station's library annex, where Thomas and Thessaly often retreated to discuss books and history. Both were lost for words yet again as they stood there together under the vastness above them. "I think I need another moment," Thessaly whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of distant machinery. She clutched at the small table nearby with a ha-and-d that trembled slightly from old age and uncertainty. The memories she had shared earlier still lingered in her heart, memories of a time when her beauty was worshipped by all who laid eyes on her, but also of how those adoring gazes faded as quickly as they had come. Thomas nodded silently, understanding more deeply than ever before the weight Thessaly carried within herself. He placed his hand gently over hers, still resting against the table's edge. It felt like a fragile connection between two worlds struggling to understand each other, but finding solace in mutual recognition of shared pain and struggle. Her breath caught as she looked down again, her mind reeling back through centuries worth of change. Once upon a time, Thessaly had been the most celebrated beauty among her people, their radiant queen, worshipped for centuries by all who saw her. Now, here she stood in this quiet alcove on an alien station far from home, feeling invisible and discarded. She stammered once more before forcing herself to meet his eyes with a determined gaze that shone through despite the overwhelming emotions bubbling beneath the surface of her skin. "I had forgotten too." Her voice broke slightly as she spoke those final words. Years upon years of self-doubt, resignation, and loneliness threatened to overwhelm her yet again, just thinking about it all once more. It was a sentiment Thomas knew well despite his own recent heartbreak and the pain that still lingered within him. "Thomas," Thessaly began hesitantly, after another moment's silence had passed between them. "Would you?" Before she could finish her sentence, he stepped forward without hesitation or fear this time now, because he understood how much it meant despite everything else standing against such connections sometimes. He placed his hand atop hers, still resting on the nearby table surface, as if to emphasize silently what he had said earlier about seeing value within her far beyond any standard set by others. "Thomas," she repeated softly, looking up into his eyes now with an intensity that surprised even herself after so many years of feeling invisible and undervalued. "Would you take me out just for a real dinner?" Her breath caught as the question slipped from her lips. It was something no one had ever asked in 4 centuries, since beauty and youth became paramount currencies on their world. Thomas felt his heart start pounding like that of a young man, despite knowing full well what age meant to them both. A real dinner, what Thessaly suggested next, could only mean one thing. She wanted him, not just as an acquaintance or friend, but someone who would see her beyond the surface level society demanded. "You're asking me for..." His voice trailed off, unsure if he was ready yet, even though deep down inside his heart felt lighter and hopeful. "A real dinner," Thessaly repeated firmly, this time with a smile breaking through all those years of sorrowful resignation she had carried within herself over so long now, because it finally felt like someone truly saw her for who she was beyond any artificial standards set by others. "A date." "Thomas Reed, would you take me out tonight?" she asked again, clearly but softly, as if asking the whole universe itself what he thought about them standing together. Heart racing and breath quickening under this unexpected request from an alien woman centuries his senior, yet somehow still feeling young and hopeful once more despite all expectations weighing heavily upon him otherwise in life these days. Thomas took a moment to gather himself. Then, with a deep inhalation of the calm atmosphere surrounding them here at their small library alcove on station, he met her gaze unwaveringly. "Horse," he replied after another silent beat filled only by distant stars and gentle hums from machines far away outside walls around them. "I would love to." They stood there for a moment longer in mutual silence once more before Thessaly's voice broke through the quiet again, her lavender eyes shimmering slightly with unshed tears, but also an undeniable light shining out now that hadn't been seen by anyone else in centuries. "I am 847 years old," she began quietly, almost as if speaking to herself just as much as him. "My beauty faded hundreds of years ago, and I have nothing left to offer." But Thomas shook his head gently, taking her hand once more into his own now with a warm sincerity that reached across the ages dividing them both. "You are wrong," he said softly but firmly, enough for it to ring clear in their small alcove space. "You still have wisdom, sharp wit, and deep knowledge. Am always learning from every day. You possess kindness, humor, a mind that challenges me constantly, making each moment spent with you precious." He squeezed her hand gently in emphasis now, as if speaking a language known only between them here amidst stars above. "Thomas," she murmured breathlessly, again almost unable to speak through overwhelming emotions rising up within herself after so long being reminded of worth beyond societal standards once more. "No one has said that about me since." He smiled tenderly at her now, understanding in his eyes the weight and significance behind such simple words spoken today. "Then they were blind," he continued quietly yet firmly, with a confidence born not just from love, but also from a deep respect earned over time spent together on station. "You deserve to be seen for who you truly are." Her hand trembled slightly under his grip now, the sheer novelty of someone seeing beyond her age and appearance after so long feeling both terrifyingly fragile yet wonderfully liberating at once. "Thank you," Thessaly whispered softly, again, almost breathlessly, this time, because it felt strange yet somehow comforting to know she mattered, even when society insisted otherwise. "For standing up for me today." Thomas squeezed her hand gently in return, the gesture simple, but profoundly meaningful, now undercurrents rippling through both their lives beyond what either might have expected initially. Amidst such vast cosmic distances, we should go back, Thomas suggested softly, after a moment of shared silence between them, looking out at stars outside, still reflecting some deeper connection forming despite challenges they face day to day or week over week here on station. It's getting late. She nodded silently in agreement, her lavender eyes glistening slightly as she looked down again before meeting his gaze one last time, now knowing things had shifted between them, even if not drastically changed overnight, but nonetheless marked something significant for both of them amidst their shared struggles against societal expectations weighing heavily upon each other. With that, they turned and left the library alcove together, stepping out into the broader station corridors, once more under the light touch of stars above, reminding them always just how far from home, yet close in heart, such connections could truly bring people despite vast galaxies standing between them on paper alone. The news traveled faster than Thomas had anticipated. Within a few days of his declaration to Thessaly, in the library alcove, murmurs and hushed conversations began cropping up around the station's social hubs. At first, it was just an intriguing rumor, a human consultant courting the ancient archivist, who rarely left her quarters, let alone socialized with anyone outside her small circle. But as days turned into weeks, whispers of Thomas Red escorting Thessaly Vor'Eventide to various functions started becoming louder and more frequent. Some mocked the unusual pairing. They found it amusing that a human male had somehow managed what no Eventari man or woman dared, seeing beyond age and faded beauty for the radiant spirit within. Others were moved by the sight of Thomas leading Thessaly through corridors, her head held high, as if restored to some semblance of grace and dignity she hadn't felt in centuries. Elderly aliens whose mirrors had betrayed them over decades watched with hope-filled eyeshope that perhaps their own twilight years could still hold a glimmer of light. Among those most affected were the older Eventari women, like Thessaly, who had long been sidelined by society due to age and perceived obsolescence. They saw in her renewed confidence glimpses of what they too wished for, a reminder that being valued didn't solely depend on outward appearances or societal norms set centuries ago, when lifespans were shorter. The night arrived with a flourish, illuminated by an array of soft lights and vibrant decorations. It was the annual Eventari Appreciation Ceremony, honoring the oldest members who had dedicated their lives to preserving history and culture despite being pushed into obscurity long before their wisdom should have been celebrated. Thessaly wore her violet gown, an artifact from times when she had been a central figure at such gatherings, radiating not just beauty, but also charisma that drew everyone towards her. Tonight, however, the dress seemed more of a reminder than anything else, a relic from an era far removed from reality. Thomas had insisted on escorting her to this night's event, despite Thessaly's initial reluctance. "I am too old," she protested softly one evening when he proposed it again for what felt like the 100th time over weeks since their meeting in the library alcove. "Then you are perfect just as is, exactly who you've become." His words cut through her defensiveness with an unusual sharpness that left little room to argue further. As they made their way down polished corridors under the watchful gaze of fellow station inhabitants, Thomas noticed how many eyes followed them, some curious, others disapproving. He felt a flutter in his chest each time someone turned back towards Thessaly with renewed interest or respect he hadn't seen directed at her before now. Arriving into the main hall filled with soft lights and melodic music playing softly overhead, Thomas guided Thessaly to take center stage alongside her revered figures of their community. The applause that greeted them was warm, but also tinged subtly by surprise. People seemed taken aback seeing such a pairing in attendance together tonight after weeks of whispered discussions. As they settled near the refreshments table, Thomas found himself standing behind Thessaly as she accepted congratulations from various attendees who approached out of curiosity or genuine affection. Each time one left her side to move on towards another conversation piece further down the room, he would gently place a hand at her waist to guide back into position for their next encounter. "Thomas," Thessaly murmured softly under breaths once, as they awaited new arrivals after an exhausting round of greetings and congratulations had finally quieted. "Do you think any of them truly see me?" He turned towards her, blue eyes steady, amidst the soft glow from nearby lanterns illuminating his face in gentle light. "Some will," he said firmly but kindly. "For others, they are still blinded by their own prejudices. But it doesn't matter if they do or not. What matters is that you know your value." She looked up at him, lavender eyes shimmering slightly under unshed tears that threatened to spill over onto her cheeks in the candlelight. "Is there even such a thing as true love?" Thessaly asked quietly, after several moments of silence had stretched between them amidst murmured conversations and soft laughter echoing around them. "Or are we just fooling ourselves?" Thomas reached out with both hands, cupping her face tenderly within his palms so they could see each other clearly despite the throng surrounding. "There's no such thing as too old," he said earnestly before bending close to brush a gentle kiss across her cheek, a gesture so simple yet profound it left Thessaly momentarily breathless and wide-eyed in surprise. "There isn't any reason why you shouldn't be cherished." As the night progressed, Thomas managed several more moments alone with Thessaly, away from prying eyes, each conversation growing increasingly intimate as they explored depths of understanding neither had imagined possible between two beings so different yet finding common ground in shared loneliness and newfound hope. And then came a moment when the band struck up one last slow dance tune, inviting everyone to join under starlit skies visible through high windows stretching across walls. The air hummed with anticipation, couples gathering together as if drawn by some invisible force compelling them towards this singular act of connection within an otherwise crowded room. Thomas looked at Thessaly standing near him among the sea of people and felt something stir deep inside, a profound recognition that beyond everything else marking their unlikely bond now was shared joy in simply being present for one another amidst all other distractions looming large around station life's bustling rhythms. "Would you like to dance?" he asked softly, extending a hand towards her without waiting too long to see if she would accept it first before finding his side and following him out onto small wooden floorboards laid down temporarily over center of hall. She took his offered hand easily enough, amidst soft murmurs drawing their gazes back up for another round of looks sent towards them from fellow guests. But tonight felt different, somehow less about what others thought or said compared to just now being exactly who they were meant to be together against all odds still holding sway over how things seemed on surface level. As music played gently around them, Thomas and Thessaly swayed slowly under starry night skies above their heads. She looked up at him with a soft smile playing across her lips, perhaps the first genuine one she'd worn in decades now, as they moved together to slow notes floating through air. "Thank you," she murmured quietly, after several minutes had passed by, breaking eye contact only briefly before meeting his gaze again with gratitude sparkling clearly there amidst depths of wisdom and grace still shining brightly within her eyes despite all time's toll on physical form. For tonight, for everything. He smiled warmly back at Thessaly now, blue irises softening under affectionate regard for woman standing so closely beside him. You deserve this, he replied firmly yet gently, in return, before leaning down to brush another tender kiss across cheek, a gesture simple but profound, symbolizing all unspoken promises between them, moving forward despite any challenges remaining ahead, a long path chosen together out of mutual respect and deep-seated trust born from weeks spent building bond between individuals who once seemed worlds apart. In the quiet moments after the ceremony's festivities faded away, Thomas and Thessaly found themselves alone again amidst starlit sky visible through high windows overlooking station beyond. They stood close together in silence for several minutes now that felt like an eternity, under soft glow of remaining lantern lights flickering gently within room around them. I love you, he whispered softly into the stillness before her, feeling his heart swell with warmth at thought of woman who had come to mean so much more than just another friend or companion since day they met on distant station amidst stars above. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, perhaps for first time realizing depth of connection forming between them despite initial barriers both had believed insurmountable against ever finding true happiness again after years spent alone and adrift from hope itself. Thomas, she murmured breathlessly now, hand reaching up to brush across his cheek tenderly, almost without thought amidst overwhelming emotions rising inside her long dormant soul. I think I might be beginning to feel the same way. With that they turned towards each other, in mutual embrace, under starlit sky above, a symbol of hope and love transcending boundaries set by time or societal expectations alike. A few weeks later, Thomas and Thessaly married in a quiet ceremony, attended only by close friends from station and immediate family who had traveled across galaxies to witness their union. They stood together before an officiant amidst stars above, declaring vows that spoke of enduring commitment despite being too old by any cultural standard. They were not young nor beautiful according to anyone else's measure, but when they looked at each other saw everything either ever wanted. From this day forward, Thomas read Thessaly poetry every night and shared stories spanning 8 centuries. Each moment spent together was a precious gift in their journey through life, where age faded into insignificance compared to the depth of connection formed between two souls who had found what they thought was lost forever amidst vast cosmic distances, yet brought closer by simple acts of kindness and genuine affection. They were not young or beautiful, it somehow that made them more than enough for each other.